I don't know that I would argue that the way the Corps is handling things right now is better than the way the other agencies are handling it in general, but it's different, and we're making the most of it.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We've got our next guest in the Zoom. Colin Smalley is president of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, IFPTE Local 777 in Chicago, Illinois, representing civil servants at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Colin, welcome to the program. His opinions are his personal opinions and are not representative of his agency. Thank you for taking your time.
Thanks for having me here, brother. It's good to be back.
We're going to be talking about the Federal Labor Relations Authority, which is the private sector, which is the public sector, federal sector equivalent of the NLRB. The NLRB adjudicates disputes arising over private sector labor law, the National Labor Relations Board. So the FLRA, the Federal Labor Relations Authority, adjudicates disputes arising over federal sector labor law. Before we get to that, though, can you explain a little bit about what your members do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I represent Army Corps of Engineers workers, like you said. We currently represent the Chicago district, which has got everything from a tugboat on Lake Michigan, a crew, we represent the crew on the tugboat, but we also represent lock and dam operators, but also some of the professions that you'd expect with our union's name, scientists, engineers, economists, accountants. We're a wall-to-wall shop. We're also right now organizing a wall-to-wall shop in the Army Corps' Sacramento, California office. And we're kind of in the process of merging with our Pittsburgh district local as well right now. So really doing a lot to try to represent, pretty much everybody who works for the Corps of Engineers other than supervisors. And so that perspective, that diversity gives us a lot of cool opportunities to stand up for each other.
Yes, I longtime listeners will know that I worked for the Corps of Engineers for a long time, and I love the Corps of Engineers. Very cool place to work, and lots of cool work being done by the Corps, and a huge diversity of people. I mean, you have secretaries to, like you said, accountants, engineers, scientists, lots of different job descriptions, and my local in particular represents people beyond the Corps of Engineers, represents, literally thousands of civil servants on Redstone Arsenal, from the grocery store workers at the commissary, which is run by the government and is somehow, not super scary to people in Alabama. I'll leave that conversation for another day. To technical GS-15s who do who are internationally recognized in their field for their expertise and all that kind of stuff. It's really cool. The federal sector labor movement. There's a lot of a really cool diversity there, even just within one agency, but especially if you go outside of one agency, then you get all sorts of folks. And
absolutely,
your members do a lot of really cool work. They do a lot of really important work. Why do union protections support rather than undermine the important work that you and your members do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we, as you can imagine, with that wide a spread of different occupations, we have people that work in a lot of different environments. So whether it's at a lock and dam, either locking boats or doing maintenance, overhauls, that kind of thing, or whether it's, like I said, out on a vessel on Lake Michigan in storms, things like that. Or recently, we had a lot of our members deploy to help with the Hurricane Helene recovery in North and South Carolina and Tennessee. And then also we've had folks deploying out west for wildfire recovery, even out in Hawaii for wildfire recovery out there. And so, one of the things that we believe in is bargaining for and having workers directly involved in the safety of their workplaces. We think that is always going to create a better outcome. But at the bottom line, I think that one of the things that I love about the federal sector unions is that our members, by and large, are they really believe in the work that they're doing. They're there to serve their community, often working for less money than they could get doing similar jobs in the private sector. I mean, a lot of folks. I mean, I have multiple PhD, folks with doctorates. They spend over a decade becoming experts in their field. We have people with law degrees and that kind of thing, and even if they're not lawyers, but they just have that depth of expertise, and they bring that every day to the service of their communities and to the public. And like I said, it's the areas where we work, but it's also nationally. We do deploy, we do support other districts, and doing. I know the shop you worked in, Jake, was would support all over the country, or maybe even all over the world. So it's one of these things that I think there's our members are bringing expertise. And so when they're bargaining not only for improving their working conditions, but they're also in many ways eager to improve the delivery of our mission, and the way that we serve the public. And another example of that, when I was on Capitol Hill last February with IFPTE's lobby week, one of the things that I was talking about was some of the Republican representatives from Indiana, especially. We made an effort to stop by a number of their offices. And one of the things that we were talking about was, there's a lot of sense that people, regardless of who they voted for in the last presidential election, do have an interest in reducing fraud and waste and abuse in the federal sector. And so I want to make 2 points on that. One is that the people that put on boots every day, the people that are out there doing the actual work, they're the experts on how to make a process more efficient. I guarantee you that any one of my employees that are in my union with me could come up with a list of things that would make our jobs more efficient. One of which, just to use a current topic example, telework. People are telling me with these extra. I mean, here in Chicago, it's common for people to live an hour and a half commute away from downtown. And so for them to now have 3 extra hours of their day away from their family, away from their outside responsibilities, they're more tired at work. They're more, they struggle to maintain that productivity. And what we had that was bargained and negotiated was a balance. It was a hybrid. It was a way for people to be efficient at home or wherever, and then balance that with being productive together in a team environment where you're face to face and you're able to just resolve, cut through issues faster that way. So, we had really found what worked for us. And so all these rollbacks are making things less efficient. They're making it harder for us to deliver. And the other point that I wanted to make on this, as far as efficiency goes, not only are people looking at the fine points of the how we do our jobs, but I want to point out something else, that a collective bargaining agreement at its core is an agreement between the workers and the management that works directly with them on how to resolve issues. Before CBAs in the federal sector, there were, let's say, I'll just pick 4 things: equal opportunity employment. If you've been discriminated against or you've asked for an accommodation to do your job despite your disability, or maybe discipline, right? Discipline that can be challenged if you're being suspended or laid off or whatever. Maybe it's safety issues like safety inspections. Maybe it's you've been disciplined and you've made it through that process, and now you want to challenge it. You're going to the Merit System Protection Board, right? Instead of 4 or 5 different ways of challenging when you've got a disagreement with your boss, the collective bargaining agreement provides one streamlined option where your management and the workers all know the rules. Now, we would say they don't always follow it. They'd say we don't always follow it, but at least we have a common set of rules. We understand what to do. We don't have to know all these different ways of solving problems, right? So that's an efficiency in itself. Collective bargaining, for as much as it may be painful to sit down and bargain out a collective bargaining agreement, a term agreement, there's a reason those are only done, every few years in most shops, because it is an investment of time and energy and emotion and organizing. But the flip side of it is that we have a common framework. And when you take away that framework and you replace it with all these different ways, all these different things you have to know, it takes away focus. It takes away our ability, again, to do what we do on a day-to-day basis for our agencies and for the public.
Absolutely. Lots of really compelling arguments there for why union protections support rather than undermine your mission. And so where are workers at the Corps of Engineers specifically, and maybe even just specifically at your office, where are they at with respect to union rights at this moment? I know across the federal government, there's actually, you got a lot of executive orders out there, but you have, from reports that I'm hearing, you're having some agencies in some districts kind of ignoring the executive orders until there's a final ruling on them. You have others, kind of zealously following the executive orders without much.
Or going beyond.
Yeah, and going beyond the executive orders, that like really feeling like they've been kind of unleashed to wreak havoc on their employees, and everything in between, right? You got so where are people? Is there an agency standard at the Corps of Engineers, and then if not, where are people at your office specifically? Where are they at with respect to union rights?
So one cool thing I want to highlight, Jake, that just happened this last week is that we had a call of unions across all the Corps of Engineers. We had 5 different international unions, locals from 5 different internationals on that call. And so it was really powerful, right? I mean, this idea that we're getting people together that a lot of times don't always talk to each other. So we're not like the VA or the IRS or even the Postal Service, where there's these national level contracts across the Corps of Engineers. We don't have that. What we've got is about half of our workforce is organized into unions. And among that half that's organized, there's a bunch of different locals all over the country. And on this call this week, we talked about where we are. And I think generally speaking, it can be summarized as the agency is generally waiting to see how this litigation plays out. They're waiting to have their hand forced by higher authorities. But I will say there are some cases where they are being forced that way. One of them's dues. They cut off our dues back in March, just like a lot of agencies did. I believe that was across the entire Department of Defense. It wasn't just the Corps of Engineers. In fact, our management had no say in it. They had no warning of it. It just happened by the Department of Defense. So there's some things like that. We had an agreement. One of the executive orders was they wanted everybody back in the office, right, on a full-time basis. And so we sat down and bargained an agreement with our management on how to do that. It was going to get us back in the office before the deadline. We really came, not to try to, appease them, but to, show some really good faith there. And we did, frankly. And the Department of Defense denied that agreement. They said that because of the executive order, we couldn't have collective bargaining agreements anymore. We couldn't reach a collective bargaining agreement. We disagree with that, and I think we're going to get into what we did about it here in a minute. But that's an example, right? That generally speaking, it sounded like most folks in the Army Corps were still receiving official time to represent employees. The management was generally respecting people's Weingarten rights. So if we don't have recognition, then we don't get Weingarten rights under the way that the federal sector law is written. And so, even though that came originally out of a Supreme Court case, the law that applies it to federal workers is only limited to those with recognition. So right now in the Army Corps, we're still having the benefits of that. Most of our shops are still participating in grievances. Although I will say, I don't believe that any shops are participating in arbitration right now. There might've been one exception where I think even as late as August, one of the locals said that they were participating in arbitration, but I think maybe that had already started. Right now, our expectation in our local is that if we filed for arbitration, we expect the management would either refuse to participate at all, or they would try to make the argument that the executive order means the arbitrator doesn't have authority to hear the case. So generally speaking, that's where we're at. If we're in this limbo, it's really, I think part of the reason the Army Corps is willing to be there is because it's a different kind of destabilization, right? I mean, um, in EPA or FEMA or the Veterans Administration where they've terminated the contracts, or the Coast Guard, they at least know where they stand and they know what tools they have to work with. We've Us being in limbo like this, we file a grievance under the negotiated grievance procedure. If they terminate the contract, then we no longer can follow that grievance procedure. But now let's take the case of an employee who started, a grievance under the negotiated grievance procedure, had it terminated. Now they go to file under the administrative grievance procedure or under the EEO process or something like that. What are they going to be told? They're going to be told that they're too late, that they had, 15 days or 45 days or whatever to file that alternate thing. Or they may even be told that, generally speaking, in the federal sector, once you choose, a lot of times you got 2 or 3 different options of ways you can go. And once you choose one, you're locked into it. So they're going to, even though you can't follow up here, I guarantee you they're going to argue that you already made your choice. You got to live with it. And so, we've got people that are questioning whether we're able to, what does the contract mean right now because of all this kind of uncertainty. And so I don't know that I would argue that the way the Corps is handling things right now is better than the way the other agencies are handling it, in general, but it's different. And we're making the most of it.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
I didn't realize that there were 5 different unions that represented folks at the Corps of Engineers, and I'll just get on my bailiwick and also say that this is not endorsed by Colin Smalley necessarily, but I'm always frustrated at how many unions represent workers at a single employer, and I've always thought that there needs to be a huge international rationalization of the labor movement. We got to get all of the unions, we got to get them in a room. And we got to say, okay, look, how many members do all of us have? Where is everybody at? And, AFGE, IFPTE, NTEU, we got to say, there's a way to get everybody basically to the same numbers that they have, but have all of the Corps of Engineers employees in one union, all of the VA employees in another union, all of the NASA employees in another union. And
can I hear my crazy idea here?
All right, do it. Go ahead.
Here we go. So, I think one model we could use, the metal trades councils in the AFL-CIO, I think are an example of something that might work if we were a little more, open-minded here. This might be an opportunity. So for those of you who aren't aware, I know at one of my sister locals at the Naval Shipyard in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, they're part of the Metal Trades Council with a number of other, the ironworkers, steelworkers, a number of other locals or different unions, and they bargain together. So the members are members of their individual unions, but then the unions are members of a council that bargains with the Department of the Navy. So they pool their bargaining power, even though they keep their separate membership among the different unions and different locals representing the different trades or what have you. And so I think that, in the AFL-CIO, there are a number of departments. It's not just metal trades. I know your union and my union are members of the professional department, professional employees department. So could there be professional employees council for the Army Corps of Engineers, where all the different Army Corps locals retain their own membership, but then bargain on a national level through a council? We could be creative on things like that, but I'm completely with you that right now we're splintered. And on one hand, it gives us a certain flexibility. I think part of the reason the Army Corps hasn't taken a shot at us yet in terms of terminating contracts is because in the VA, you could terminate 3 or 4 contracts and cover everybody. In the Army Corps, just in the Army Corps, you'd have to terminate, 30 some contracts. Well, spread that across the whole Department of Defense, it's thousands. So, I think to some extent being diversified can have some strategic benefits, but I'm generally with you. I'm a lumper rather than a splitter. I'd rather have us all combine our power. And I think I mentioned, my locals looking into some mergers and things like that. So I'm with you on that. But I think you're right. I think the moment calls for some amount of consolidation of our collective bargaining and collective action power. And I think the more that we're talking across lines, I'm active in the Federal Unionist Network. This is a group that, is explicitly across all agency lines, all union lines. We don't care, all the quasi-governmental corporations, the post office, the TVA. We've got our door open to everybody. And we're trying to supplement all the great work that's going on in the international unions and the local unions around the country, but also just get people talking to each other. And we've seen, in my opinion, tremendous leaps forward by international unions that competed with each other in the past, or maybe have kind of kept things to themselves, or try to keep a competitive advantage amongst themselves in the past. We've seen them collaborating in ways that may have existed before, but weren't quite as strong. I think whether it's lawsuits, whether it's bargaining, whether it's congressional advocacy, all the unions are bringing all their resources together right now in this moment, and it's really good to see. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean,
yeah, speaking of your joint council proposals, Maxwell in the chat says postal unions used to engage in joint bargaining, so there's definitely a precedent in the federal government, and so maybe you and nice. I can submit competing resolutions at the next AFL-CIO International Convention. I can go and argue for rationalization, and you can argue for joint councils, and we can see who wins.
I love it. Whoever's out there listening, appoint me as a delegate to the next AFL Constitution convention, and I'll be there.
There you go. So, you talked about how, you mentioned that we're going to be talking about what's been one of the things that's been going on at your local with the FLRA. Before we get into that, I wanted to just have you outline for the audience what typically happens. If you had a dispute with your Corps of Engineers office last year of the same nature, you would have gone to the Federal Labor Relations Authority. How would that have gone? What does that process look like under normal circumstances?
There are four main categories of things that the FLRA does that the unions are involved in. One of them is if you go to arbitration and you disagree with the arbitrator, you can file an exception, basically appeal it to the FLRA. Another is what they call representation. So if you are organizing your workplace, you want to have an election, you've gathered the cards, the signatures of an appropriate number of your coworkers. The FLRA is the one that handles those. They also handle, things like mergers, things like, if somebody thinks that the union doesn't actually represent the employees anymore, they handle those kinds of deals. So representation is the second one. The third one is bargaining disputes. There's in the federal sector, we have in some ways a wider scope of bargaining than the private sector in terms of bargaining over all changes in working conditions. But in some cases, there's some harsher limits. We can't bargain over pay or benefits, that kind of thing. And so a lot of times we'll get into a disagreement with management, and we can take that to the FLRA as well. So that's bargaining. So that's the third category. And the fourth is going to come to me here in a minute. But the point is, unfair labor practices. There you go. So if we think that the management, or if management thinks the union is violating the federal sector labor law, we can file an unfair labor practice charge against the other party. If an employee thinks that their union isn't representing them fairly, they can file an unfair labor charge against the union. If the union thinks management's being unfair, we can file against management. So that's the fourth category, is unfair labor practice charges. So in those four categories, generally speaking, there is some role at the regional level. So the FLRA maintains regional offices around the country. Until extremely recently, there's been 5 of them. in relatively recent history, in the last decade, there may have been as many as 8. So there's these regional offices that have attorneys and other staff that look into, they investigate what the issue is. A lot of times that's enough to resolve the problem. Management or the union will kind of dig into their position. Neither one wants to concede to the other that they're wrong, or that they agree with the way the other parties put it forward. But when you get the FLRA attorney in the room, a lot of times, once they get all the facts straight, and they talk to everybody, it becomes clear what the resolution ought to be, and it can be settled. So a lot of times it can be resolved before you even get a decision at the regional office level. For unfair labor practice charges, for bargaining, certain bargaining disputes, and certainly for representation, those were all handled there at the regional level, with people that are in our own time zone. Generally, they know us and our management better because we work with them more frequently. Worst case scenario, we could, if it ever came to a hearing or counting ballots and that kind of thing, we could do it face to face. Here for us in Chicago, we had a Chicago regional office here in Chicago that we could directly interface with if we needed to. So all of these things, if for some reason it couldn't be resolved at the regional office level, the regional director would make a decision. If that decision wasn't satisfactory to one of the parties, it could be appealed to the actual FLRA, which has a national office, but they also have members. It's supposed to be 3 individuals appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and from different political parties. So there's supposed to be this body that ultimately holds the final decision authority for what the FLRA does. And then most of the things that they rule on can be appealed once you have a final decision of the FLRA to the federal courts, but not until then. You have to work within the Federal Labor Relations Authority processes and get a final ruling from the national authority itself before you can go to court. That's the way it's supposed to work.
And so what's happening now?
So what we're seeing now, there's kind of 2 main fronts. One is that with the executive orders that purport to make whole agencies not subject to the federal labor law, we are seeing the FLRA sometimes at the urging of the agency and sometimes on their own doing, I'm going to say, blocking. That's what they call it in the unfair labor practice context. They say they're going to block the ULP. And so instead of investigating, instead of having those FLRA lawyers at the regional office look into it and find out the facts, they just send a letter as soon as you file it, and it says, we're blocking this case because of the executive order. We're waiting for the litigation to play out. So they don't even look into it. So like I said, we're losing a valuable opportunity there, because a lot of times the investigation itself is what led to a resolution, right? It wasn't, most cases don't go all the way to the authority. And so by them blocking it right there up front, we're really struggling. But we're seeing them block this. They may use other terms for it, but we're seeing them block every kind of case. So there's I mentioned we're organizing in Sacramento district, but a sister local in IFPTE is organizing in the Portland district of the Army Corps. And they collected enough signatures. The employees express interest in a union, and they were entitled to an election, assuming that the signatures are all in order. So they filed those signatures with the FLRA office in San Francisco, and that is being blocked. They're not getting a vote. Their democratic will of the workers is being blocked by the FLRA because this executive order might apply to them. Right? It's wild. I mentioned the agreement that we reached with our management on to achieve, by the way, one of the administration's objectives, blocked by the Department of Defense. Normally, the way that works is when they block something that's already been agreed to, that's supposed to be expedited. In the law, it says that this is supposed to get an expedited resolution, faster than normal, from the FLRA authority itself. That's in the law. And yet, the FLRA, after asking me to write why they should hear the case, which I did. I wrote 8 pages of legal arguments on why they should hear the case. They just paused it. They said, we're going to put it in abeyance. And that's it. We filed a response to that saying why we didn't think that was the right choice. They didn't even respond. So we're getting complete abdication of their duties. They have taken their responsibilities and completely ignored them at this point. And at this point, you only have 2 out of 3 members sitting on the authority. So I understand, we don't have a general counsel. We haven't had a general counsel in the Federal Labor Relations Authority, which is an appointed position since 2017. There's reasons for that. It's ridiculous. But what that means is unfair labor practices, the way they get from the regional office to the authority is through the Office of General Counsel. So since 2017, they haven't been making it there, right? We're coming up on a decade of this kind of complete abandonment of federal workers by the Federal Labor Relations Authority.
And so your local is continuing to act like a union, even in light of attempts by Trump to take away your union rights, in light of, the sort of lack of presence of the FLRA. How are you doing that? And where can people learn more about acting like a union without formal recognition or without maybe support from some of the more official channels?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that there's a lot of great, let me start with who else is doing some great thinking on this in addition to the unions. I mentioned the Federal Unionist Network earlier. I'm also an organizer with the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, EWOC, and I can't say enough good things about EWOC as well. They're also doing some fantastic thinking about this. It has a bunch of names. Sometimes you'll hear it called pre-majority unionism. One thing that some friends and I were thinking about the other day, kind of just informal unionism, right? This idea that our power, the source of our power at its root, the reason that we got an FLRA in the first place is because of collective action. It's workers coming together and talking to each other, figuring out what their priorities are and standing together to make it happen. And so that creativity, that's the source. The FLRA and all of the structure of the Civil Service Reform Act in 1978 that we talked about last month, that all came from a desire, like I said earlier this afternoon, that our desire was between management and the unions to create a process that was easier to follow, easier to understand, all of that, than what was already there. All that stuff that was already there is still there. So like I said, we can still file a case with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, or Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. So an example of that, my local right now is supporting me being a personal representative, not in my union capacity, but the union is supporting me by providing some resources to help me, learn and do some of the volunteer parts of that job, to represent somebody who's not in our bargaining unit, who doesn't have a union that can file a grievance and go through the negotiated grievance and arbitration process. We're taking that case. It's potentially going to go to a hearing next month in front of a judge. And so, we're using that to show how quickly we can pivot to a different process. We stood up for a fellow union member of our local who had deployed overseas to a different part of the Army Corps of Engineers, but he wasn't technically covered by our contract. But we still filed a grievance on his behalf when he got an unfair evaluation in his annual performance review. And that had an effect on the bottom line of his annual performance bonus. And so we won that. We got that money back in his pocket. And so, the thing is, we're turning to all these things. An example of, just from this week, yesterday, I delivered a petition signed by 50 of my, fellow union members that here in Chicago, the president's ordered a number of, an extra number of federal law enforcement agents from ICE and other groups to try to disrupt, to make chaos and try to, goad the people of Chicago into rioting and that kind of thing. They're trying to start something here. And so, even today, if I were to go downtown, leave my house, go downtown in Chicago, I would get carded to see if I have, either a place of business downtown or a dwelling downtown before they would even let me into the downtown of my own city. They've threatened to bring in the National Guard, things like that. So what my fellow coworkers did is we signed a petition. It's up there live right now. More people can sign if they want. We've done our initial delivery, but we didn't close the signatures, to say that we should be allowed to telework during this violence that the Homeland Security Department is trying to visit upon the people of Chicago. And so, so far we haven't had a response. Like I said, we delivered it at the end of the day Friday, but we'll see what happens on Monday. We also called for our boss to educate people that they have a right to protest. They have First Amendment rights, even as federal employees. The Hatch Act is often given to federal employees as an example of things they can't do. But I don't think a lot of people know that the Hatch Act has a list of things you can do. It is also a protection for federal workers. And so I want my boss to remind workers of that. And then they can give the examples of things that they shouldn't be doing. They shouldn't be going out there. Like you said at the beginning here, I'm not speaking in my capacity as a federal employee. I'm not speaking in my capacity as an employee of the Chicago District or the Army or the Department of Defense or War or whatever they're called. So as long as I don't keep those logos on, as long as I'm clear in what capacity I'm speaking, as long as I have a sense of, putting up those appropriate boundaries, I'm not honking for a picket line while I'm driving a government vehicle. There's things that make sense, right? But in our personal capacity, we have First Amendment rights, just like any other employee, just like any other American. And so we want management to remind people of that. So that's something we did. But a petition, that's nothing in my CBA talks about that. Nothing about, my collective bargaining rights talks about our ability to file a petition to talk to our boss, who happens to be a public official. So, those are all examples. Like I said, I've got a blog post up on the EWOC website that has a number of my ideas on kind of, creative ways the unions can still represent people. But I also want to be really clear that the bottom line is the basis of our power is organizing. It's one-to-one conversations, workers talking to other workers, learning what's going on, when they've been wronged, and taking a stand together to put those things back right.
Federalunionists.net is the Federal Unionist Network's website. Y'all are having some trainings on this kind of stuff soon, right?
We are. So we did one on Thursday night, this last Thursday night, but we've turned this into an every 2-week session. So every 2 weeks, we are getting online. It's at 7 o'clock Central on every other Thursday night. So not this coming Thursday, but the Thursday after next. You can sign up. I don't know if it's on the federalunionist.net website, but if not, if you sign up, you'll get added to the Slack. And I know we've got it there. I can get the production folks here at TVLR the link as well to sign up for that, to register. So no, that'd be great. We'd love to hear y'all. I was talking at the one on Thursday. We heard some great things from a bunch of great unions around the country. We're going to try to bring in more people from different unions, different both rank and file members, but also experts at our union staff. People ask, why should I pay union dues? One reason is because we have access to experts on the staffs of these national unions, whether they're lawyers, economists, lobbyists, just some fantastic bench of expertise that we have direct access to. So we're working to bring those, get that in front of everybody. That's part of why we still need to be members, even when the boss tries to tell us we don't have a union anymore. They're wrong. Federal unions are still unions, and I'm proud to be a member of one. And I'm so glad you all had me on today.
Federalunionists.net is where you can go for that and fill out their form to join the Federal Unionists Network, and then you'll get notifications about, about stuff like the trainings that Colin was talking about. We've been talking to Colin Smalley, president of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, Local 777 in Chicago, Illinois, representing people at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers there. Colin, thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.